Welcome to the Simple Ayurveda podcast. I'm Angela Prager, and this is a place where we discuss how ancient wisdoms can be applied to your everyday life so that you can be your happiest, healthiest self. Hello, and welcome to episode 159 of the Simple Ayurveda podcast. Today's topic is Dhatu nourishment and care. The dhatus are the 7 layers of the physical body. So in Ayurveda, we look at how the layers of the body, the parts of our body, the organs and the connective tissues and all parts of us work together in unison rather than in separate systems. So basically it all starts with chewing our food and the digestive process, and then from there the nutrients get passed to each layer of the body progressively every 5 days, so that whatever we ate 35 days ago has moved through all 7 layers to form ojas. And so I'm going to explain what some of these words are, and if you've been listening for a while, some of these words will be familiar. Back in episode 89, I gave a basic intro to the dhatus. So if you want to start or just kind of refresh your mind without all the other stuff that I'm going to share today, there's a short and simple episode there with 89. And then in episode 110, Kate O'Donnell, who is an amazing Ayurvedic practitioner, author, and cookbook author, she walked us through the dhatus as well and gave some sample recipes of nourishing them. So the reason that I am talking about this today and why I'm bringing the topic back around on the podcast is because so many of the things that we do in Ayurveda, like chewing our food or getting enough rest and all of the things that help us to feel in harmony and have doshic balance, are really supportive of the tissues of the body. And when we don't do those things, that's when I'll use the word, they start to corrupt, because that's like the way that it's described as what happens. So today's podcast episode is part of the unit in the Simple Ayurveda Collective that we'll be doing together for the months of October and November 2021. All of the units in the Simple Ayurveda Collective stay there so that you can visit at your own pace anytime. And what I share here on the podcast, so each month I have been pulling the topic from the collective and doing a podcast episode based on some of the notes that I put together. So that's just an offering for you to start to absorb some of this information and play with it in your own way. And then if you want further support, these notes are all typed out and available in the collective membership, along with specific practices like specific recipes and self-inquiry to help you make this information mean something for you in your real life. So that's a super affordable option to practice Ayurveda month by month with just one focus to really feel into it and absorb it and go deep a little by little, rather than taking in everything all at once and not really sticking with any one thing. So together as a group for October and November, we'll be going through the dhatus week by week with small little practices that support each one of these layers of the physical body. Today, what I'm sharing, I just thought I'd share some resources. Some of the information is coming from Ayurvedic Medicine by Sebastian Pohl, which is an amazing book on herbs and really a whole background of Ayurveda. The Everyday Ayurveda Guide to Self-Care by Kate O'Donnell. Of course, she's one of my favorite Ayurveda teachers and authors. She's been on the podcast twice. And that book, The Everyday Ayurveda Guide to Self-Care, gives a rundown of the dhatus and some specific recipes, like different drinks and concoctions that support different aspects of our physical body, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit today. And then also the Textbook of Ayurveda, Volume 3 by Dr. Ladd. So those are some of the resources, as well as my own course manuals from my Ayurveda Health Counselor Studies and Ayurveda Practitioner Studies, and always referencing the Sanskrit text when I can. Okay, so we're going to look at the 7 layers of the tissues in the body. And the word dhatu means that which holds together. So like I said, there are 7 layers, and what is metabolized by each one forms the following layer. Sounds kind of complicated, but really it's just, as you chew, the food goes to one part of our body, and then those nutrients are absorbed and passed along, and then the process repeats until it makes us its way, the nutrients make their way all the way to the deepest parts of us. And so when we start to experience imbalance in a particular place in the body, like for example, if we experience imbalance in the skin, or if we experience imbalance in our eyes or something like that, then we don't always necessarily look at the surface level of what's wrong. So for example, if you're experiencing, skin problems, yes, you can put a cream on top, but that won't really get to the root cause. That'll help ease the symptoms in the meantime. So in Ayurveda, we wouldn't necessarily go and look up herbs for the skin, although there are different things that have certain affinity for the skin. But really what we would look at are what are the qualities that are happening, and that gives clues to what brought it out of balance to begin with. So Dr. Lad explains in the textbook of Ayurveda Volume 3 that have this quote, Dhatu Agni is the tissue's protective barrier. The first effective dosha attack is on the Agni. So what this is saying is that when the doshas start to fall out of balance, so when Vata, Pitta, or Kapha start to wreak havoc a little bit, basically they start to attack Agni. And we know Agni is digestive fire. The word Agni has so many nuances to it. And when I talk about Agni, I kind of like lump it all together, like digestion in the human body, or digestion of thinking about things. But Ayurveda is so nuanced and really dives in deep for those that want to go into those studies. And so there are different types of Agni within our body. So there are different functions that our digestive fire plays depending on what its role is. So each tissue has their own little like system of Agni, digestive fire, that is processing the nutrients to take care of it. And therefore, when our Agni is functioning well, when we take care of Agni, there is like this cushion for doshic imbalance, which is basically when we start to do things that throw us out of balance little by little. Like let's say it's a cold, wet day. It's actually raining a little bit outside as I'm recording this. And so let's say I just went and ate yogurt today, which also has a cold, wet quality to it. And then I had sugar later. And so I'm just kind of like layering in all of these things. Well, when my Agni is really strong, it can handle those insults or that little bit of doshic imbalance, which is why we can all walk the path of moderation and we don't have to stress about every single little thing we do. But when we make those choices over and over again, the dosha becomes so imbalanced that basically it's knocking on the door of that Agni and it's barging in when it becomes strong enough. So that's that like attracts like. Remember, one of the main foundational principles of Ayurveda, like attracts like, and opposites create balance. So when we, the like attracts like, when our doshas are building. So let's say it's Pitta. Let's say that you're overworking and you've also signed up for a race and you've gone into power yoga and you've eaten a lot of spicy food and you're getting in a lot of arguments, and it's like all this fire is just building. Well, eventually that fire is going to break down the walls that Agni has around certain tissues in the body. Now, why does that happen for one tissue versus another? I don't have that answer to that. I think that it's a little bit of, we could say that genetics. One of my teachers says that we all have certain areas of weakness in the body. We could say that's tendencies. We could say that like perhaps the pattern of doshic imbalance you have goes toward a certain space in the body. So if you have a tendency toward like physically aggressive exercise, that might wear on the joints first, as opposed to creating potential imbalance in another part of the body. So I don't exactly have the answer to that, but these are the questions that you could start to ask yourself. And so I'm going to go on with what Dr. Lad says. Disease happens when an aggravated dosha enters a dhatu. All dhatu disorders are caused by the entry of a dosha into a dhatu, resulting in either a qualitative or quantitative change in that tissue. Okay, so what we have here, we have a dosha aggravating that barrier of Agni so much that it enters into a dhatu. So, for example, we'll go with Asti Dhatu, which is, I'm going to go into the dhatus a little bit, each one by one, but Asti Dhatu is our bones, the structure, also our nails, our hair, and our teeth. So let's say we have Vata, aggravated Vata, a lot of air, that wind element entering into the bones. Well, that causes dryness. So we can have a qualitative or a quantitative change. We can have the quality, so it can go from functioning the way it's supposed to function. Maybe the bones weren't the best example for that one, but basically we could say that it's corrupted, right? When it's not functioning the way it's supposed to function. So maybe a different organ in the body. So the quality of the organ is not there anymore. It's not doing what it's supposed to be doing. And then we can also have quantitative. And quantitative would be that example of like Vata getting into Asti Dhatu, the bones, and creating depletion because that air element is literally drying up the minerals in the bones. So when it comes to excess Vata, you could see how depletion occurs. And another example would be like muscles losing their strength, atrophy, I think it's called atrophy. Sorry for the pronunciation, but with like emaciation, that would be examples of Vata creating quantitative change. So literally things are withering away, disappearing, shrinking. With Pitta, the quantitative change, we have excess fire element, which usually I think at first would cause a qualitative change. It would cause like a fiery inflammation. It can cause infection depending on which part of the body we're talking about. But then eventually that fire also withers away and causes dryness. And then quantitative change when it comes to excess kapha is basically we have overgrowth. So this is how like tumors and cysts and any kind of growth that doesn't belong usually has some excess kapha because that's that earth and water element accumulating in a way that's not ideal. So the purpose of talking about the dhatus and gaining a wider understanding is so that we can see the relationships that happen in the tissues of the body, and we can see exactly how doshas start to affect different parts of us. Because sometimes when it's just this bigger concept of don't do this or do this because it might cause harmony or disharmony with the doshas, and sometimes those effects are really obvious, and sometimes it takes more to connect the dots and to understand how our everyday behaviors might be contributing toward some deeper imbalances. And it's not to say the imbalance is your fault at all, because when you don't know, how do you know? But the deeper we dig, the more we can ask the questions that are meaningful. So when it comes to nourishment and care for the dhatus, we can look at Agni, knowing that having strong Agni is our first line of defense. So if you're brand new to the podcast, you can check out the episodes on Agni, on simple ways to take care of your Agni. Mindful eating is like the utmost important. And I'll just say, as I say frequently on this podcast, chew your food well. That is definitely the first line in taking care of the dhatus. Then we can look at doshic imbalance, because that's the energy that builds up and starts to create either the corruption, the decline in tissue, or the overgrowth that we don't want, right? That's doshic imbalance. And then the next part is ama. Ama is the metabolic waste that's created through toxins, whether it's through not chewing our food and our food becoming toxic, or from consuming things that are toxic, or being exposed to things that are toxic. And so, of course, when we're exposed to toxic things, it's going to create toxicity or corruption in our systems. So we can look at Vata creates a weakened tissue, Pitta creates inflammatory conditions, and then Kapha creates excess tissue or growth. If you do have a chronic condition or you recognize imbalance in your datus, I highly recommend working with a practitioner before you jump into any kind of herbal protocol because like Dr. Marianne Teitelbaum mentioned recently on the podcast, if you haven't had a chance to listen to her, please go back and listen to episode 156. She's amazing. And what'll happen is, you might recognize that there's some imbalance in the liver, and then you Google Ayurvedic herbs for the liver or herbs that support the liver, and actually all of those herbs that you'll read about create heat because they stimulate the liver. But if you already have an overheated liver, then is that going to be helpful? And that's where working with a practitioner to really figure out herbs, I think, is mandatory, and to just work with your food is super powerful. Personally, I've reduced the more that I've studied herbs, the more that I've interviewed all of these amazing experts on the podcast, the less I'm using them because they are powerful. And, the companies online, the blogs and things that are recommending, we just really have to look at the fact that, they're selling herbs. And so let's zoom out, slow down, and work with food first and slowly and carefully incorporate herbs. So that's my PSA on that. Okay, so let's start with Rasa Dhatu. That is the first of the dhatus. The word translates as sap, juice, or liquid. And this is the foundation. This is the first dhatu. So as you chew your food, this is where it's going to process first. And this dhatu provides nourishment and hydration, as well as physical and mental satisfaction. So the word rasa has a couple of different meanings. And one of the meanings is taste. And this is your juiciness. This is the plasma in blood. So the part that's like the serum. And Rasa Dhatu circulates through your whole body. So it's the only dhatu that is really everywhere. It's considered to be all 5 elements, but mostly water. And the causes of malfunction are not chewing well, too much bitter or astringent food. So that'll elevate vata dosha, right? That's the salad and green diet with nothing grounding to balance it out. Being dehydrated, which can happen from eating a lot of foods that have preservatives and salt that kind of zap out the moisture from within, as well as not drinking enough fluids or eating juicy foods and enough healthy oil like ghee or olive oil or avocados or nuts. And then in the mind, consistent worry contributes to zapping our juiciness. Congestion, so overly heavy foods like French fries and oily foods like that, especially rancid oils, and anything really that obstructs Agni, because this is your first line of digestion. You're chewing up your food and it's circulating through the body. So general support for Rasa Dhatu includes making sure that you have enough water, moist foods, sea vegetables, fruit. The ancient texts love dates, ghee, almonds, soups, and movement that keeps your circulation going, especially yoga, just because yoga really reaches into all parts of the body. And then the next dhatu is Rakta Dhatu, which is the blood, including both the white and the red cells. This is our vitality, and this is the transportation for oxygen and prana nutrients to the body. So it gives us our color. So Rakta, being the blood, gives us when we don't have well-functioning Rakta, that's when we can kind of like not have color, have gray, sunken type of skin tone. So this one malfunctions from too much alcohol or sour, spicy, salty food, smoking. So this is the elements of fire and water, and we basically cause malfunction when we aggravate pitta. Some general support for Rakta are juicy things like red grapes, pomegranate, blueberries, cherries, plums, beets, carrots, dark leafy greens, relaxation, so not overdoing it, of course, but then moderate exercise. So you'll see that there's both kind of stimulation and relaxation for each one, because there can be malfunction, there can be deficiency, or there can be excess. So the answer is really staying in the middle. And what is the middle? That's going to vary person to person, but most of us need some kind of movement every day in some way. But when we go excessively toward too much movement or too many light foods, we create deficiency. And when we don't move enough, or we eat heavy things that congest, then we create excess and buildup. So we're really like going the middle path. And then there are specific things that have affinities for different parts of the body. So here, basically, like things like beets and dark leafy greens and pomegranates and blueberries, they support having that strong vitality and the blood. Next is mamsa dhatu, which translates as flesh or meat. This is our muscle, and it has the function of plastering the body and providing strength, stamina, binding. This is mostly earth element, but also some water and fire. Causes of malfunction in mamsa dhatu: stress, too much exercise or sweat. So that's when if we deplete ourselves, lack of sleep, so not getting adequate rest, and too light or too heavy of food. So general support is adequate protein. Nuts are said to be helpful for mamsa dhatu, root vegetables and whole grains, sleep, and moderate weight-bearing exercise. So some of the common things that we know are really good for us. And if you're a yogi, holding plank and doing standing poses that focus on building strength and things like that. Maida is the next dhatu. That's healthy fat, and it gives us the function of lubrication. It insulates the organs, and it also provides oil in the hair, lubrication to the joints. So we want adequate lubrication. We want adequate fat to moisten us and keep us nice and juicy and not let us dry out or wither away. But we want it to be of good quality. So now we're back to, with the fat, it's really important to look at the source of where you're getting. And so causes of malfunction here could be rancid oil. I know personally, I've really pared down to cooking with ghee, and I use coconut oil occasionally, and then I drizzle olive oil on top, but I mostly just use ghee. And maybe I'll do a future podcast episode or try and find a true expert on the oils, because this is a topic I've gone down the rabbit hole in my own research, and I'm just not too comfortable or crazy about using all of the vegetable oils out there, even the ones that are recommended in traditional Ayurveda, because of the way that they're now processed for modern day life. So personally, I don't really use a lot of sesame oil or sunflower oil that you might have heard me talk about on the earlier episodes, because as I've dived in a little deeper and started to learn more and hear from more practitioners with diverse viewpoints and stronger backgrounds in science, we have to be really careful about rancid oil, basically. So I just throw that out there that, yeah, personally, I'm cooking with all ghee pretty much. And I would say coconut oil would be, if you're a vegan, probably the best choice, in my opinion. So too much or too little exercise is going to mess with the lubrication in our system. So naturally supporting Maida dhatu, we can look for the healthy oily foods, and then a small amount of bitter or pungent to balance the oil and break down the fat. So basically, we don't want to overdo and have the whole plate be leafy greens with no grounding and no healthy fat, because that's what causes vata to go in overdrive. But then when we do want to have some of that, we want to have leafy greens on the plate. We just want it in a balanced amount and usually cooked for digestion. They're easier to digest when they're cooked. And then we have asti dhatu, the bones, which, like I mentioned, also relates to hair, nails, which is why the nails and hair can really give clues, because we can't see our bones unless you're getting a scan or something like that from a doctor. So noticing what's happening with your hair and nails gives a clue to what's happening with the rest of your skeletal system. The bones are earth and air element. They're really considered like a vata part of the body because of that porousness, the ether element there. Stress and multitasking and all of the stuff that dries us out is going to affect and cause malfunction. And then some general support, mineral-rich foods such as seaweed and seeds. The traditional texts say, the ancient texts say sesame seeds in particular, also dark leafy greens. If there is severe depletion, this is when the texts talk about meat and bone broth. And then meditation also is said to be really helpful for the structural support of our body. So seaweed, some easy ways to start to incorporate seaweed. I like to use kombu. It's Kombu. It comes in a big sheet. It's really thick, and I just snip a piece off and throw it in the Instant Pot or when I'm cooking beans, and it's said to help relieve gas, but then you're also getting the minerals. So you can snip it really tiny so that it sort of ends up looking like an herb in a soup or a broth. And I think that's the easiest way. And then of course there's small seaweed things like kelp that can come in a shaker that we can sprinkle it on top of food. That's a nice gentle way to start to bring seaweed into the diet without it being too intrusive until you get accustomed to it. Next is Maja Dhatu. This word translates as marrow, but it's basically the nervous system. So it's bone marrow and the spinal cord, and it serves as the function of communication, sensory and motor function. It's the structure of the nervous system. It's lubrication in the eyes. It's your tears, synovial fluid. This is like Maja Dhatu is everything. It's the nervous system. So, I mean, we're talking about ADHD, fibromyalgia, like all of the stuff that really affects our functioning so deeply. And so you can see how those kind of conditions don't just come about. They're like the storm brewing. So causes of malfunction here, long-term stress, trauma, and chronic undernourishment. So undernourishment can happen even if, that happens if we're eating a poor diet. So like a lot of fast food, or if you grew up on a lot of processed food, even a person can be overweight but undernourished, and that's going to have an effect on the nervous system. So general support for Maja Dhatu. Ghee is like the gold star here, coconut oil being second. Medicinal ghee, so ghee that has the herbs cooked in a particular way. And of course, I've had Will Jackson on here from MetaGhee twice just because I love his work. And if you haven't had a chance to listen to the recent episode on ghee, he explains a lot about medicinal ghee. And also Yoga Nidra. Tracy Stanley was on the podcast. She's a Yoga Nidra queen, and I highly recommend checking out her work and listening to her podcast, Radiant Rest. And if you haven't tried Yoga Nidra yet, there is a recording in the Simple Ayurveda Collective for you. And I just can't recommend it enough. I've been doing it every single day for the past 2.5 years, and it's changed my perspective on everything. It's magical. So do Yoga Nidra, and it's wonderful for your nervous system. And there are tons of scientific studies that back up the power of Yoga Nidra. And then finally, there's Shukra or Artava Dhatu. Different texts use those words. Shukra is often used to describe the last Dhatu, but then oftentimes Shukra is used to describe the male reproductive organs, while Artava is used to describe the female reproductive fluid. But either way, the word means bright, pure, radiant essence. This is the essence of creativity of humankind. This is the last of the dhatus, and this feeds into ojas, which is your immune system and your blissfulness and your juiciness from the deepest layer of possible. So rasa, the first dhatu of chewing your food well and having proper hydration, is juiciness, but then as the nutrients pass through all 7 layers, they end up at like the essence of your juiciness. So this is the water element. It can malfunction from too many spicy or dry foods. So again, we have vata or pitta depleting it. Excessive alcohol or caffeine also creates excessive mobility and like burning up energy. So anything really that like burns up your energy without replenishing it is going to cause malfunction. Specifically, the text mentioned ghee, dates, soaked almonds, walnuts, saffron, and cinnamon as supportive for this final dhatu, as well as having a moderate and conscious sex life. So the texts don't recommend not having sex for like a regular householder, if you're not a monk, but to have a moderate amount that's conscious. So really making it something special and giving it the sacredness that it deserves. The texts don't recommend having too much work during the menstrual cycle. I'll put it that way. So resting as much as possible. So really taking care of yourself, and also proper postpartum care. And if you didn't get that, of course, you're kind of on the OJAS replenishment rebuilding tract that most women that have had children are on. So the dhatus, they are the 7 layers of our body's physical tissues, and it all starts with hydration and chewing our food well and handling the stress in our life through our practices, so that we become stronger rather than becoming depleted by it. And Agni is really the first line in taking care of the dhatus and nourishing them. So supporting your Agni through all of the mindful eating practices, and then doshic balance. So hopefully going through these a little bit more and thinking about how they show up in your body, to me, it's further inspiration to stick with some of those habits that I might want to get lazy about. So for example, we know that a daily rhythm is such a vital part of keeping Vata dosha in balance and in harmony. And when we eat at similar times every day, when we get enough sleep, when we wake up at similar times, we create a rhythm and a routine, and we create stability within ourselves. And when we do that, Agni functions well, Vata stays calm, and Vata's not pushing on those dhatus, starting to cause corruption and depletion. So we can look at what's happening in our own bodies. If there's growth, like cysts and things like that, or benign tumors, we can realize that there's some sort of kapha imbalance. And so that's motivation to perhaps look at the foods that help to pacify kapha, the lifestyle practices like waking up with the sunrise that start to pacify kapha. So making that connection between what we do every day in our life, like the time we wake up, what we eat for breakfast, whether we're taking breaks, whether we're choosing rest or simplifying or saying no when we need to say no to take care of ourselves, has this direct correlation to what's happening in our body. And we can use the support of doctors and practitioners and herbs and things like that, but we also have the power to look at it from the root cause and start to course correct if things are out of balance. So again, if you want the notes from everything that I shared today, they're in the Simple Ayurveda Collective, as well as journaling prompts for each dhatu. So kind of digging a little deeper and looking at the energetics of why we might be dehydrating ourselves, like why do we make those choices, or looking at the energetics of what support and stability looks like, or what true rest and nourishment looks like for each part of the body, as well as some super simple recipes and practices. And of course, the support of the group in our chat that's off of social media, where everyone's like really loving and shares what they're up to and inspires each other. So the link for the Simple Ayurveda Collective will be in the show notes. And thank you so much for listening and going along on this journey and sharing your journey of Ayurveda with me. So thank you so much. Have a beautiful day. Om Tat Sat. Thank you for listening. I would love to stay connected. Please join the free Simple Ayurveda community newsletter for resources, including recipes, journal prompts, and other tools to help you implement Ayurveda into your modern everyday life. The sign up is at simpleayurveda.com. Have a beautiful day. Namaste.